Ellis Island system was a federal government copy of the New York State Castle Garden system. All right. Before Ellis Island opened in 1892, New York did that. Held most immigrants came in through New York, and they were filtered that way. If you were a criminal, you were sent back. If you were indigent, you were sent back. How did they know you were not indigent? You had to have $50, which, think about it. Okay, that's 2.5 ounces of gold. What is that? That's like, $8,000 today, enough to live for a month and find a job. Or you had to have a job offer, or you had to have a sponsor. And if you had any of those three, you could stay. And if you didn't, you were on the boat right back to where you came from. And when the federal government took over, we said, yeah, we'll just do what New York did for a while.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.
Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 370. I'm talking to Thomas Eddlem, who used to be with the John Birch Society. He now writes for the Libertarian Institute. We're going to talk about immigration, and Thomas is interesting is that he actually did go from being more of a closed border person to being an open border person. So, how are you doing, Thomas?
Oh, I'm doing great, Chris. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Thomas, one thing I do want to ask is, how did you become a libertarian?
Ooh, I don't know. A long story. One of the things when I when I was in high school, I ran into the John Birch Society, and I was a standard Reagan Republican, and the libertarian literature is all in the John Birch Society bookstore. So I started reading it and gradually became a libertarian. Also, I saw the practicality of its theories, where some of the liberal, conservative, whatever ideology didn't really seem to work. So when libertarianism has been tried, to the extent that it's been tried, it works.
Yeah, I've often referred to the Birchers as cautious allies. I mean, they're people who fight who are good to fight with. A lot of times we've got to be cautious. So, it's 80% of the time they're right. So that's what's the important thing. Yeah, it's funny. You sound like me. We're the last of the libertarians who got our education from book catalogs.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was.
Right before people were getting it from the internet. So anyway, you've talked a lot about, so what you recently also talked about immigrants and crime in an article. What have you discovered about immigrants and crime? Because there's often this attitude, well, we got to keep out these immigrants because they're going to commit crimes. But you've said that's not really true, or at least they're less likely to commit crimes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're less likely. Yeah, because there is. How do I put this?
Yeah,
there is a filter on some of the immigrants coming into the United States, and the federal government tends to say, if you're among the legal immigrants, if you are a murderer, you can't come in. So as a result, because immigrants are people, and people commit crimes at a certain rate, there's the rate of immigrant crime is a little bit less in the United States than the rate of native-born crime, because of that filter. Of course, we also have an unfiltered immigration over the southern border, and it would probably be about the same as natives. I would guess. It's hard to tell the native versus, or I should say, the legal versus the illegal. And I put the illegal in quotes because my conversion on the issue of immigration, I started out as something of an immigrant hawk. I mean, I was coming out of the John Birch Society, and I got converted because I was asked. Here's the thing. Let me give you the 2-minute story of my conversion. If you go online, you can read immigration hawk articles by me before 2006, up till 2006. And in 2006, I got asked by a donor to, hey, we really like what you're writing. We want you to write something more hardcore. So I did a deep dive into immigration and crime rates, but also into the constitutional history of immigration. And I found, oh, wait a minute, that's not an enumerated federal power. The federal government doesn't have the constitutional authority to run immigration. In fact, it was prohibited to them by a part of the Constitution proper, as well as the 10th Amendment. And the history is the federal government didn't have any immigration laws until 1875, and even then, it was only to ban uh, the importation of slaves under the 13th Amendment. So I I did a 180 and I said, okay, well, I never had any biases against immigrants. I just thought, hey, we should enforce the law. And if, obviously no one who is open borders says murderers should be able to flee from their crimes to the United States
Yeah,
and jurisdiction jump. I mean, no, but that's sort of the the the
yeah,
the tag they want to put on people who are relatively open borders. And
yeah.
uh, I sort of got off track here, but I found also that immigrants don't have higher crime rates, and as I studied them a little bit going forward, I found that gee, there's a real lobby to promote the idea that immigrants have higher crime rates when in fact they don't.
Yes, well, I do think we can say that at least some people on the left don't want us to put violent criminals in jail, but, that also applies
Okay,
to
that's true. That's true.
native-born Americans who are violent criminals. But, and obviously, when we're talking about crime, we're not talking, about, some kid who steals a hubcap. I mean, that's everywhere, and people don't really worry that much. I mean, it's, as I call it, nuisance crime. I mean, it's crime, but it's not really, it's not the kind of crime that's gonna make you wanna move out of the neighborhood. But, but yeah, yes, so there's, as you pointed out there, yeah, we had no immigration law, and it's really, wild to think at some of these cases too, we absorbed immigrants by just the boatloads. I mean,
Let me
that
just clarify here. There were immigration laws, but they were run by the states.
yeah,
All right.
federal immigration
And
laws, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the Constitution does say things about naturalization, which, which means becoming an American citizen, but
right.
simply coming here to live is a different story. And I do wonder, when I hear about undocumented immigrants, I really have to ask myself, how do they know about these undocumented immigrants? I mean, it's a lot like when I hear feminists talk about all these unreported rapes. I mean, well, how do you know that there are all these unreported rapes if they're never reported? So can we really know how many undocumented immigrants there are if they're never documented? I mean, if somebody comes across the border and lives here for 10 years and never has any interaction with a cop or an ICE agent, do we really know that
Well,
they're here? I mean,
we can know within a range. I mean, the Census Bureau does a hard count of everyone who lives in every domicile. So, and they don't account for citizenship. So we can kind of gather, okay, we know there's this many citizens and there's this many people, and go from
yeah,
there. Uh, but it's hard to say. I mean, that's why a lot of the people who are immigration skeptics, if you want to call them that, they would say, "Oh, well, they say there's 20 million illegal immigrants, but there's really 35." Well, we don't know. I mean, there's no there's a lot of fake statistics that are just made up on the fly and thrown out there because people want to believe in it.
that's the thing. Unfortunately, I do think we have, and not just about immigration either. Unfortunately, we have a lot of made up statistics. I mean, I often, we often the saying about anecdotal evidence isn't scientific, but the thing about anecdotal evidence is you can prove it or disprove it. I mean,
Right.
I mean, I hear, I mean, I hear stories of people having trouble bringing their, in some cases, even helping your wife get citizenship or wanting to bring your wife into America. I know a guy who's in Mexico now, married a Mexican and has a Mexican wife, and she's not an American citizen, but it's like, you can't even bring your wife to meet mom and dad. And it's like, that seems kind of absurd. Or the guy I knew from Peru who wanted to the guy, an American who was living in Peru. His father dies in the state of New York, and he wants to bring his Peruvian girlfriend to his father's funeral. He can't do it. It's, and I just ask myself why. And when people say, our border is wide open, I said, well, obviously it's not, because this is what happens to people who try to work with the system.
Well, I mean, that's the argument. I don't know if you watched it either, but there was a debate between Dave Smith and Alex. How do you pronounce this?
Yeah. Alex,
Norasta. Okay. And Alex won, in my view, because Dave made a very weak argument. But here's the thing. Dave's argument was, I'm very practical. I want to take control of the borders. You're just living in dream world. And all I could think of was this, that it's the people who are border hawks who are very impractical, because we've been doing that for 30 years and it's never worked. And if you look, I mean, I'm trained as an economist. Uh, and one of the things that is incentives. Yeah, like the incentive, because we have prosperity, is people are drawn here. So we can filter out the bad ones by having an open immigration system, or we can be border hawks and have quotas and then have this huge undercurrents, with people coming in unfiltered.
Yeah.
That's the real policy choice. And if you're concerned about crime, well, you want to be able to filter out criminal gangs who come here, and that the way to do that is to open up the immigration system, not to crack down, because it just means more people are going to come in through the back door. That's just the incentive system. So Dave Smith's argument was, in my opinion, it wasn't even it was also not libertarian, but it was very impractical.
That's true though. Yeah, if you have an Ellis Island system or something like that, you have a better idea of who's coming in and going out. If you totally drive it underground, you're not going to have a good. Not to mention, you inflict this police state on Americans. I mean, I certainly talk to plenty of people who live within 100 miles of the border, and sometimes they'll just stop and be randomly searched. And I don't know how you enforce this without just going to these super hyper police state tactics. Uh, and for that matter, too, Tom, we often hear it, the other big scream is, well, they're coming here and collecting all these freebies. Well, why don't these people talk about getting rid of the freebies? I mean, how would immigration change if these people showed up and nobody gave them, and there was nothing, there was no government funding of them? How much of a factor is that?
Okay, that's the subject of a future article that I've already submitted to the Libertarian Institute on immigration and culture, because the argument is, well, they're ruining our culture by dragging us down their financial dead weights. They're soaking up all of these benefits. And there's an element of truth to that, in the sense that in Massachusetts, we have immigrants costing the state $1 billion a year, almost $1 billion a year,
Yeah.
because of they just put them up in hotels and whatever.
Yeah.
But if you look at the aggregate numbers, how much immigrants pay in taxes and how much they take out, even with the tiny subset of, well, not tiny anymore, of refugees who are heavy welfare state takers,
Yeah.
they're net taxpayers compared to American citizens. The reason is, immigrants don't qualify for welfare except refugees. Okay, refugees are the one exception. So they don't get much in benefits, and they still pay in taxes. They pay in less taxes than American citizens, but they get a lot less in benefits out.
Yeah.
And the trick that the immigration skeptics use is this it's really an insidious accounting trick. Basically, what they do is they say immigration households take in more benefits than they do. And that's true. If you account for immigration households, in other words, immigrants and their children, they are heavy welfare users because their children tend to be Americans, and because they're American born, they're US citizens and they qualify
Yeah.
for welfare and they tend to get welfare. And those, if you will, second generation Americans, the first are the immigrants, the second are the anchor babies, if you want to call them that. They are heavy draws on the welfare state. But they are also the biggest taxpayers of any generation. So they more than make up for what they consume once they become adults. But that's the thing. If you cleave the numbers, immigrants, their children, and longtime natives, generation 3 plus, the the immigration and the anchor baby generations are closer to being net taxpayers than are the generation 3 plus. But if you cleave it sideways and you say, okay, we're just going to count immigrants themselves and their children, their American born children, while they're children at home as dependents until they get out of college and get a job and start paying taxes, then they become a big a net drain. But how how rational is that? I mean, when you think about it, how why would you count anchor babies as immigrants when they're born here, but only while they're kids. And then once they start paying taxes, then you don't count them? That's the accounting trick they use to say, "Oh, immigrants are a net drain." That's that's the strategy that
True.
is used across the political spectrum. You can go to any immigrant skeptic group and they're going to say immigrant households, and that's what they mean. They're not going to do it generation by generation. They're going to do it crosswise so they can get those immigrant kids and count the anchor baby kids and count that toward the immigration generation, but not the anchor babies as adults paying taxes.
Yeah, Tom, there's one thing else too, and I don't know where this figures in, but I also hear of, what I would call indirect government payments. For example, the government gives X dollars to Catholic charities, and then Catholic charities ends up spending this money on illegal immigrants. What can you say about that?
Ooh, I haven't really looked into that, so I guess I
Yeah.
can't say much. I'm familiar with Catholic charities. I'm Catholic myself and
Yeah, I mean,
involved in one.
that's just one organization, but there are some immigrant,
Right,
organizations like this who are essentially doing the government's work, or at
right,
least getting paid by the government. Yes.
right. I d I don't know. I really can't comment on that. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know that, but the thing is, if you count that for immigrants, then you should count the same services going toward natives.
true.
And I think what you're gonna find is it's not gonna make much difference on the ledger. If you're counting how much do immigrants pay in taxes versus how much do they take in, and then you're talking about natives, how much do they pay in taxes versus how much they take in, I don't think it's gonna flip the ledger. I really don't.
Yeah, Tom, I have long believed though too, though, that one reason why conservatives really don't try to get rid of the welfare state is so they can use it as an excuse for other restrictions that they actually want. I think they keep the welfare state as a rationalization. Well, we can't legalize drugs, and they do it for the same thing. Well, we have to, we'll keep the welfare state, but then we'll say we can't, and they'll use that as a rationalization for not having immigrants. What do you think about that? It's like they keep the welfare state alive so they can use it to rationalize controls that they actually want.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, my experience was with the John Birch Society
Yeah.
back in I wasn't on staff at the time. I left their staff in
Yeah.
2001 when I moved back to Massachusetts. But I still continued for a freelance writer as a freelance writer for a decade and a half longer. And in 2006, there was this move to let's do more about immigration. And William Norman Grigg and I, who were both becoming libertarians, and really, I mean, I was already writing for libertarian publications at the time anyway. I mean, I was writing
Yes.
for LouRockwell.com back in the 90s. But
Yes.
we had said, well, why do we want to do that? What I mean, immigration. We've got this Bush administration, which is has these torture sites all around the world. They've got we've got this omnipresent not censorship yet, but omnipresent spy agency that was sucking in all of Americans' data, and we knew about it, and all of these other things. Why focus on this immigration thing, which is not that big a deal? And the excuse was, well, this is popular. This is what's going to get us to grow as an organization. And I don't know. I looked at the data, and it's still this basically the same thing. The people who care most about immigration tend to be senior citizens. I mean, it's largely an older demographic, and I suppose if you're looking for money, they're the ones who have it. But I just don't see it as, hey, this is the path to electoral success, because younger people don't care about that. I mean, if you look at even 2024, yeah, immigration was the third largest issue. But if you look at who thought it was important, it was all people over 65. And the most important issue, the people who flipped, it was, hey, my pay's going down because of inflation. My pay is doesn't buy what it used to buy. And as a result, because the median wage earner had a lower pay after you adjusted for inflation. That was the number one issue. And they looked at Kamala Harris and they said, "Well, what are you gonna give me?" And she says, "You'll get nothing and you'll like it." And they looked at Trump and he said, "I might give you a little tax increase or a tax cut." And they said, "We'll go with that." I mean, that was the sum of why the election was decided. It wasn't decided over immigration. I mean, those senior citizens, they voted Republican anyway. They weren't gonna flip because Trump took Reagan's stand about open borders. They weren't gonna do that.
I never thought much about that, because it seems like maybe it's just because the people who hate immigrants seem to scream the loudest. Thomas, I will say too, when people talk about culture, I mean, I moved to Austin, Texas in 2004, and I live here in 2025, and I can definitely see how mass migration will change a city, and I mean people from California, you know, and maybe that's another reason why I don't get so upset about Mexicans or people from foreign countries, is because I'd rather have them than the Californians. Uh, but anyway, it seems like, I think this does seem like it is a popular issue, because I do wonder if a lot of the people who go out and preach all this anti-immigrant stuff would do so if it was unpopular. I think a lot of them would drop the position immediately.
No, but it's heavily funded. That's the thing.
Yeah,
There are huge foundations pushing this. I mean,
yeah.
it's not just, I mean, in one of my pieces, I talked about, oh man, what's her name? They call her oh man, now I'm having a moment here, but there, the Sears and Roebuck heiress, has basically been the Johnny Appleseed of immigrant fear, especially anti-Islamic fear, and
The
just
Sears and
create.
Roebuck heiress? Yeah, I'm trying to think of who
Yeah,
that might be.
Nina, I can't remember her last name. Let's see.
Yeah.
Uh, Rosenwald, Nina Rosenwald. And she, one of the groups she founded was the Gatestone Institute, which, was totally spooked up. I mean, it had a former CIA director that, the first, as its found one of its board members. It had John Bolton as its executive director. And it was,
Okay.
the whole thing was, hey, let's promote fear of immigration, because now she is an Israel firster, in the sense that she's always been in APAC, and she was a
Yeah.
big funder of Camera, which is a big Fear the Muslim group. And one of the things they don't want is Muslims coming to America, because that would make it more difficult to hate Muslims in America. And like, it's hard, it's easy to hate. I mean, I remember when I moved to Wisconsin, I remember uh, I saw more anti-black sentiment there than I did in Massachusetts, where we have a fair number of black people. And one of
Yeah.
the reasons was that in Wisconsin, there weren't any black people. Like where I lived, there was maybe I only met one black person. He was a reporter for the local paper. That was it. This was the whitest of white places. It's
Yeah.
easy to hate someone that you don't know. And that's the thinking that, hey, if we get Muslims coming to America, they'll start electing Muslim congressmen, and then they won't fear all of these Muslim countries, and Israel's position will be with the United States government will be at risk, and that's a big part of it. It is not a small part of it. There's millions and millions of dollars being put to fear Muslims, and yeah, the racists go along for the ride, and a lot of people go on, with the political things thinking, and there's a lot of, I think, nice people, not mean-spirited people who say, "Hey, we have federal laws and we should enforce them." I get that.
Yeah.
I was one of those people. I just believe we should follow the Constitution instead of whatever Congress says this week. But I get that position. It's not a racist position to say, "Hey, we have laws, we should follow them." Uh, However, if your position is also we should just shut off immigration, then I have more of an issue.
Yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned culture. I'm gonna go on a bit of a rant about that because I that's the most amorphous thing, fighting, saying, "Oh, well, immigration changes the culture." Well, yeah, I mean, but what does that mean? Does that mean we get
Yeah.
rid of tacos and go back to boiled dinners? I mean, does that, sure, it changes the culture, but in what way? A lot of people think it means, oh, well, don't want to have people from these countries that are more socialist. But if you look at the countries they want to admit from versus the countries that they're afraid of, their governments tend to spend a lot less money. I mean,
Yeah.
the countries that spend the most per capita are countries like Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Germany and the whitest of the white countries, whereas a lot of these other countries that we think of as socialist, they actually spend less money, and their economy in many respects is freer. So I don't know. It just, or they say, "Oh, well, they don't have that, that culture of liberty, that Western heritage." Sometimes they'll even say white heritage. But we don't have a white culture in America. We never did. We don't study Prussian legal theory. We don't study the Napoleonic Code or Tsarist Russian legal system. It's not a white system. We do have a British system of of
Yeah.
heritage. But what that means, instead of admitting immigrants from Germany and France, we should admit immigrants from the fellow common law countries like Tanzania and Malaysia. Not, that, but that's not the way it's connected in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, I don't and culture is not something that permanently stays the same either. I mean, cultures evolve. I mean, yeah, look at culture, for example, go back 80 years and, people used to spend a lot more time playing card games, and now people play video games instead because video games are there. They didn't have video games.
Yeah.
There are so many things that impact culture, and I don't. I often hear them screaming and shouting, and Thomas, the one thing in general is I don't trust, at least in America, I trust so few of these people who complain about immigrants because I always see that there are hidden agendas underneath there. And I was saying years ago, I said it's not just you never hear somebody say something like, "Well, I don't hate marijuana, I just hate illegal marijuana." Uh, you never hear that, but boy, you hear, and I just say, well, if you don't like illegal immigrants, make it all legal. That's what but they're like, no, don't do that. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
Nina Rosenwald. I have to admit, I had not heard of this woman, but yes, the Gate Stone Institute,
Yeah.
and looks like she's mostly fueled by anti-Islamic prejudice, and she's certainly, yeah, and just
It it's
another
not
person
just her
who's
though. It's
yeah,
I just
well,
because it was easy.
then, I guess strictly speaking, she's really not even American at all. She's an Israeli who lives in America. But anyway, which we have lots of those. But anyhow,
Yeah.
uh,
No, I mean, with culture, I mean,
yeah,
you listen to someone like Conor McGregor, contemplating a run for president of Ireland. And he goes,
Yeah.
"Oh, our culture is being stampeded. We're at risk of being, being extirpated in America. I mean, in America, in Ireland, our Irish culture is going." I mean, it was as if you would. It was as if you the mostly Polish and Ukrainian immigrants to Ireland had stolen the Blarney Stone and putting Guinness and Jameson out of business, and and taken all of the you taken Ulysses out of all of the Irish libraries. It's just insane. I mean, I do know that immigrants often don't assimilate into the culture. I know that from Boston. I mean, we have a large immigrant population here in Boston that they came in and they built their own churches and their own schools away from the American the traditional churches in Massachusetts, and then they uh they hang their foreign flag over all the bars in Boston. They take over the city streets in a drunken frenzy every March 17th, and it's the Irish. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, that if Irish culture can't be extirpated in a minority culture in Massachusetts, it's not gonna be extirpated in Ireland. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to me that that's just hysteria.
Yeah, I think I know a lot, and it's true that Irish people were, whose ancestors came from Ireland. I think largely because Ireland has just been beaten down by Britain so much, they just want to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm Irish." But they love America. They do. I mean, there a lot of people of Irish descent are really great Americans, and there was tons of prejudice against Irish Americans here. Uh, they
It was.
and it's funny too that a lot of Americans, you'll see a lot of a lot of people who aren't Irish and have no connection to Ireland, they kind of adopt some of these things. They'll wear green on that day, and they'll kind of embrace it. It's in a way I think America's richer because of that. It's
Sure. And,
you know
come May the 4th or 5th or whatever it is, we'll all put on Mexican hats and sombreros and, do the what is that holiday that we celebrate that not they don't even celebrate in Mexico? Um,
Cinco de
shoot,
Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo. There you go. I mean,
Yeah,
they don't even
it's funny.
I mean,
It's
until we popularize it, they never even celebrated. It was like a
I mean, yeah,
it's like a
well,
little thing.
I think that was just, sometimes I just wonder if that was just popularized by bars as a way to
Yeah,
sell beer on another
that's
day.
it.
And
That's it.
it's funny because people don't even know what it celebrates, and it celebrates the victory in the Battle of Puebla, which I believe was in 1862. You know,
Against the
at,
French. Yeah.
at least St. Patrick's Day has a name on it. It said, but it's true also. Yes, how many people know who St. Patrick was? And said, well, basically, he converted Ireland to Christianity, but that was
Yeah.
part of just how these holidays evolved. But yeah, it's so there are a lot of allegedly Mexican things in America that, for example, I go out to Mexican restaurants, I get enchiladas all the time. I go to Mexico, there's almost no enchiladas. It's so but that's another story. But yeah,
No, I know. We sort of make up culture for every I mean, like Kwanzaa. It was made up by an American in the 1990s, and or maybe it was the 70s, but it was made up by an American, and now it's
yeah,
celebrated all across Africa. They just picked it up and, "Yeah, let's do this. This is fun." I mean, but it we just made it up. I mean, we but a lot of times we do bring their culture here, and that's fine. And I love all the restaurants. I mean, when I was growing up, we had a choice of when we had ethnic restaurants. I'm older. I'm almost 60.
yeah.
We had a choice of, oh, you want an Italian restaurant or you want a Chinese food restaurant. Now there's like all kinds of choices. It's
Oh
great.
yeah.
So it's totally different. I could go to Ethiopian food or Thai or Indian. I mean, those were never available in Massachusetts,
Oh
in my
yeah.
part of Massachusetts back in the 80s when I was growing up.
Yeah, that's something that holds true for immigrants no matter where they're from and where they go. They love to open restaurants.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I remember seeing a bunch of Korean restaurants in Mongolia. It's because a lot of North Koreans end up in Mongolia. So And I don't know what, I don't know what their attitude is, but Mongolia has the lowest population density in the world, so I figure Mongolia is just like, oh sure, we got plenty of room, come on in. It's like,
Yeah.
but, and you certainly hear plenty, but you certainly hear plenty of horror stories too about the way some of these immigrants get treated when they leave their country. They end up often working horrible jobs and sometimes horrible conditions too. They end up getting hurt or something like that, and they don't really have a whole lot of recourse. It's I do think in some cases, yes, I think some employers like immigrants just because they know they can't abuse them. Uh,
Well, that's especially the case with the H-1B visa and the other H-1 uh, programs. They come here basically as indentured servants because the employer holds the green card. So they get fired, hey, they're out. And I oppose those programs for that reason. I
yeah,
think, hey, if they want to if you want to come here with a job offer, I mean, like you mentioned Ellis Island, that the Ellis Island system was a federal government copy of the New York State Castle Garden system, all right? That
mm,
before Ellis Island opened in 1892, New York did that. Did held most immigrants came in through New York and they were filtered that way. If you were a criminal, you were sent back. If you were indigent, you were sent back. How did they know you were not indigent? You had to have $50, which think about it. Okay, that's 2.5 ounces of gold. What is that? That's like 8 grand today, enough to live for a month and find a job, or you had to have a job offer, or you had to have a sponsor. And if you had any of those three, you could stay. And if you didn't, you were on the boat right back to where you came from. And when the federal government took over, it was we said, yeah, we'll just do what New York did for a while. They added more restrictions as time went on, but that they just copied New York because the federal government never had an original idea. But the point is, the way people should come is if they have a job offer and not have it contingent on the employer holding the card and holding all the because that is actually a way to suppress wages because now they can negotiate down saying, hey, we own your visa. You want to go back to America? We can pay you less. And of course, now they can pay less than an American. So it's not a fair market. So every libertarian, I would think, would be opposed to the H-1B visa program because it suppresses the wages of workers, which are really the most needy and most people most needing of protection by government, and it artificially distorts the market. But you listen to a lot of people and they say, well, they take sort of the opposite view, like Trump, they'll say, well, what we don't want is people to be able to just come here whenever they want. But if we have skilled workers, we can have them come in through the H-1B visa program. That way we know we've got people we want. No, what they're doing is they're selling out to corporate billionaires and who are just trying to suppress wages of workers. That they're sort of taking the opposite view of libertarianism, in my view, and it's practical for the billionaires, but it's not practical for everybody else.
yeah, and when I was talking about employers abusing their employees, I was talking more like just not letting them go to the bathroom, you know, and just bad conditions, not taking care of safety and stuff like that. But that's something you'll hear from a lot of immigrants. They will say, that I'm treated better here than they are by their employers somewhere, in Venezuela or someplace like that. But, uh, and yeah, this is actually true though. Is it true though that the majority of illegal immigrants are not people who came in illegally, but people who overstay visas, right?
Yeah, people who came in as tourists or students, and then they stayed and overstayed their visa. Yeah, that's the majority. But so in that sense, those illegals are vetted, but they're still. I mean, like, just take for a second, think who's going to come to America if we have open borders, or even if we don't, we have an open border on our
Yeah,
southern border because of who wants to come to America. Well, traditionally, it's been the really hardworking person who wants to succeed and knows America's a place where you can succeed
yeah,
because we have a free market and all the rest. But there's one other category of people that want to come here too, the people on the run from their crimes. And when you have this unfiltered southern border that we have right now, you get those people as well. So if your practical view is, because I mean, let's face it, the C student, the dullard, is not going to want to immigrate. He's too lazy, right?
Yeah.
It takes courage. I mean, to go to another country. I mean, I moved at 22. I moved across America from Massachusetts to Wisconsin. I was kind of nervous, even though I had a
Yeah.
job offer and I had a place to stay. I mean, these people, a lot of them, they come
Yeah.
here. They don't. Some of them don't have. Some of them don't have jobs. They don't have a place to stay, but they just, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It definitely does, though. It takes that for the first time you leave home, you move out of your parents' house, and then you decide you're going to go. y- You know, uh, it really is a big deal, and you think about a lot. It does take a lot of courage, and or just things are so bad that you just want to get as far away as you can. Yeah, it
right,
does take that. I mean, I think in a way, I think immigrants are self-selected for that because you're talking to people who often go thousands of miles away, and they don't necessarily have an easy way to call home, in some of these cases,
yeah,
it's
that's the point I'm making. That there is a huge self selection factor in immigration. Always has been. In fact, in the 50s and 60s, we used to call it the brain drain because Europe had all of these socialist policies. I'm talking about Western Europe. They had these very high income taxes, and basically the wealthy entrepreneurs and the doctors and the technicians, they said, "Hey, I can make a lot more money by moving to America." So they did, and that's exactly what happened. They called it the brain drain. We got all the smart people from Europe because we had, relatively speaking, low taxes and low restrictions on wealth and everything like that. And the same thing even happens even today. There was a story in the Financial Times a couple of years ago about how in Venezuela, they lost like three-quarters of their doctors. They just moved out of the country because of their
yes,
socialist policies. So, some of them came to America, but a lot of them just went to other Latin American countries, and the story was basically about how Mexico got this and Colombia and Bolivia got this bonus of, "Hey, we have all these great doctors now that we never didn't have before."
yeah,
And so there is that self-selection in immigration. The 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 immigration hawks focus on, hey, the people running from their crimes. But if we had a relatively open immigration policy, and I say relatively open, I don't mean anybody can go anywhere no matter what, and people can run from their crimes and jump into the United murderers can come to the United States or terrorists. But what I mean is if we had that Castle Garden system or even a federalized Ellis Island system. I'd rather go back to the States doing it. Uh, but if we had that system in place again, then we'd filter out the criminals and the indigent. There aren't that many of them. I mean, New York turned back 2 to 3%, and Ellis Island also about the same early on. There aren't that many that want to come here who are lazy or criminals. I mean, it's mostly people who just want to work hard and succeed. And, and the longer we keep these immigration quotas in place, the more we have this backdoor of actual criminals who can come across the border unfiltered.
true, yeah, and Tom, I've got to point this out too. I've seen Javier Milei holding a Venezuelan flag on at least one occasion. Those Venezuelan immigrants absolutely positively love him, and he
Oh
loves
yeah,
them. I mean, I sometimes think that the Venezuelan immigrants are might actually be doing as much as anybody to kill socialism in the rest of South America. I certainly hope it happens because I know a person personally has helped about 50 Venezuelans get out of that country. He's really helped them out. It's because
I,
there are some truly and it's funny to hear people talk about that because we do it here. We vote with our feet. I mean, I left, a high tax state to go to a low tax state. It's unfortunate that it's easier to vote with your feet than it is to vote at the ballot box. But yeah, it's you know, uh,
yeah. I mean that is literally what's happening with a lot of these immigrants, right? They're voting with their feet against socialism and coming to the United States. A lot of people
yeah,
think, oh, they just want to bring it here. No, they don't. They don't. I mean, I I'm trained as an economist. I got my master's degree in applied economics from Boston College. But my full-time job is working as a in the trades, and I work with a lot of Venezuelans, and like last month, a Venezuelan said to me, "You know what the most dangerous animal in Venezuela is?" And because we were talking about how Massachusetts has no dangerous animals, he goes, and I was thinking, no, he'd say a jaguar, anaconda, or whatever. He goes, a chavista, and
Yeah.
Chavez was that's his party that Maduro's in. He loves Javier Milei. I mean, just and so do all of the people I work with. Like
Yeah.
these I played a Javier Milei speech for a Guatemalan I worked with. He goes, "Oh, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. They don't want to bring what they left behind here.
Yeah.
They came here because it's a different thing." And people don't seem to understand that there is that huge self-selection bias in immigration,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Yeah.
And you know, Thomas, I really can't say that for the Californians who come to Texas. I mean, they want to bring California to Texas, unfortunately. But anyway, uh,
Yeah, well, that may be. That may be. That's the old joke about Massachusetts and New Hampshire, right? That every great tyranny has its refugees. Whether it's the boat
yeah,
people or the feet people across the Berlin Wall. Well, we have the SUV people from Massachusetts invading New Hampshire. But yeah,
well, that's why I guess why I'm wondering why aren't you in New Hampshire? You could do a lot more good up there. But maybe you have your reasons. I found it
yeah,
interesting.
family. Yeah,
Yeah, family's often the reason. I found it interesting a few years ago. Smith and Wesson had long been headquartered in Massachusetts, and they were going to move to Tennessee. And I'm just like, geez, why didn't you get out of Massachusetts 50 years ago? I mean, Smith and Wesson is headquartered in one of the most anti-gun states of the union. And then I said to some
yeah.
free speakers, I said, "Hey, why didn't you try to get Smith and Wesson to move up there? Certainly would have been easier than moving to Tennessee."
I
But
would
anyway,
think. Yeah.
yeah. And there are other things too. One thing also I think that another factor too is if you're aware of it's EMTALA. That this was a nice law signed by Ronald Reagan. That great conservative that basically said emergency rooms can't turn people away. So now a lot of immigrants just go to the emergency room where they can get their medical care. It's again that's a but what's funny, Tom, is I actually saw Aaron McIntyre say something like, well, if we just got rid of these immigrants, we'd have a functional healthcare system. And I'm like, are you kidding?
No, no. Here's the thing.
Healthcare in America is a complete disaster with or without immigrants, is my point.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah.
It is. But here's the thing. What's the profile of the typical American immigrant who's coming into the country? It's it's like a 19-year-old male. They're healthy. They don't need health care. They might go in for a couple of stitches once in a while, but they are
Yeah.
underusers of healthcare compared to Americans who
That's
typically
true.
are
Yeah.
older. I mean, two-thirds of all of medical expenditures are for people over 65. Immigrants are much younger, and so they're not the users of that.
Yeah.
That's not a practical
Yeah.
way.
Most immigrants are probably yeah, like you said, in their 20s, maybe in their 30s, and those are the people who probably use healthcare the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, yeah. Old people tend not to immigrate. I mean, that's what's happening. In places like Ukraine, the people are end up stuck in Ukraine are the old people who can't move and the young people who can't move. It's
That's it.
of course, as I often say, too, watch it's the young men come here, but yeah, there's so much. I think basically I see the ugliest part of the anti-immigrant people on Twitter. It's like somebody complains, who are those immigrants going to marry? Our daughters. And then I said back to him, I said, trust me, no, they're no, you have them spend time with American women, they'll be running back to their home country pretty quickly. But that's another story. You know, Thomas, how do you think? How can we convert these people? Since you've been converted, you might have some insights on this. I've never really had to be converted, but Is there a way to do it? Because they're so emotionalistic about all this stuff. And
There is a lot of emotion. There's a huge propaganda narrative going that way, so it's difficult to do it. I'm not. I was converted because I did this deep dive into what are these numbers? What is the constitutional reality? Because I leaned back a little bit on my Catholic background of, hey, everybody is a child of God. So I didn't have this sort of, well, there's this native. If a person doesn't have my skin color, they're a bad person or whatever. I didn't have that view. Uh, but I think people can be convinced if they're shown that they're being lied to. And that was the point of my most recent column over at the Libertarian Institute. If you were being lied to about immigration crime, would you believe the next lie? And you sort of pointing out, okay, there's this narrative and it's based on lies. So open your eyes to the next lie. Don't just move on to the next lie because they say, oh, well, there's this crime wave uh, of rape and by immigrants in England. And then I show them, okay, it's not true. And 10 years ago, there was a narrative of a rape wave in Sweden. Wasn't true. And they did it for basically every Nordic country. They've done it for Ireland, Germany, Denmark, Norway. I'm waiting for the one from Finland. But I mean, it's every this narrative, and every single one of them turns out not to be true. I mean, how many times do I have to be lied to realize, oh wait, that's dishonest. The people telling me this are dishonest, and they have financial incentives. Like when we go back to the Gatestone Institute, uh, they have a financial incentive because the Gatestone Institute funded all of this anti-Muslim bigotry, and some of the people on the Gatestone Institute board, like a former CIA director, had a financial interest in Genie Oil and Gas, which got an exclusive drilling right in the Golan Heights. So it's just one of those, oh, I see. There's a financial incentive in there too. So I started putting all of these things together. And what you do, it's like putting those glasses on in the movie Them. You know, you see the thing for where it is, how it is from then on, and you can see the pattern of lies. I mean, it shouldn't take a genius to figure out that Muslims whose holy book is regularly, repeatedly condemns any sex outside of marriage and promotes modesty in women. Probably rape is not something that is part of their code. Uh, just like, by the way, it's repeatedly in the Christian Bible as well as the
yeah,
Jewish text as well. But I mean, you would think there wouldn't be something endemic to Islam about raping women, and yet people believe it
well,
based on these false statistics.
all of these holy books have their contradictions, Thomas. But yeah, Thomas, I'm surprised by that answer because in my experience, when people have been lied to you and they tell and you tell them that they've been lied to, they just hate you for telling them that. They don't want to accept the proof. I mean, how do you get them to accept the proof? I would love for this to work, but I don't believe that it does. So,
I think if you get someone young enough who hasn't been inculcated enough, I mean, but
okay,
also I think you can get a few younger. There are a few
age is a
older
factor,
people
yes.
who are, yeah, but I think there are a few older people who are still open. I mean, who are still intellectually curious, who can be converted. I mean, I'm trying to think. How old was I in 2006? Uh,
Yeah.
I was
Well,
31,
yeah.
31. So
Well,
I mean,
one
I wasn't super young.
one thing I've learned is that that because something works on, something works on me, it'll work on everybody else, and that's not necessarily the case. But yes,
That's it. Yeah, you have to work on everybody individually as a
yeah. I
person.
mean,
There's no
I've
formula.
often
Yeah.
seen like converting him, Thomas. Another thing that often comes up says something like, "America is not an economic zone," and I said, actually, what society in history was not an economic zone? And now maybe some little tribes formed as self-defense or hunting tribes, but every society in history has been an economic zone. People coming together for purposes of economics. You know, I mean, isn't that right though? Really? I mean,
Yeah, that's true. I think the point when they make that is what the old conservative Samuel Francis used to call the myth of the economic man. That America is, yeah, it's an economic zone, but it's more than economics.
yeah,
Man is more than economics, and I agree with that. Obviously, 100%. That much being said, I think economics works with the rest of humanity as well. I mean, for me, hey, I'm about 20 minutes from going to church.
yeah,
So I, uh, I believe that's the most important thing, much more important than the quarterly profit statement for the company I work with or the GDP numbers or any of that. I think that's way more important. But it it doesn't mean economics is bad. It just means that I think in libertarian sense that gee, if we get government out of the way, people can pursue their own interests, which includes spirituality, which includes raising families and love and all of these other characteristics that can't be measured by economics. We can't really measure love or courage or any of these other virtues by
yeah,
economic metrics. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the economic aspects of things either.
true. And Thomas, isn't that true though? That at least before Karl Marx and the feminists, that a shared value across a lot of the world was people wanting to get married and have kids. I mean, that's something that people do everywhere. They do it in Africa, they do it in Europe, they do it in Asia.
Yeah, it cuts across religions, it
Very
cuts
I mean,
across
almost
generations. Yeah.
I mean, granted, it's not everywhere, but it's certainly something that we see in so many of these cultures. I mean
No,
I
it's
mean,
everywhere. It's
yeah,
everywhere. Like find a culture or a
yeah,
time where their marriage was not a thing. I mean, it changed a little bit. Some cultures accept polygamy or whatever, but for the marriage is always and kids has always been a thing. And of course, it
yeah,
has to be. I mean, otherwise there wouldn't be people anymore.
yeah, and, I got into it. Yeah, every time I get into a Twitter battle with a Trump supporter, I realize that Trump supporters are worse than Trump himself. But, it's something like, "Economics is not a" this is a quote, "Economics is not enough and has never been enough. Cohesive, successful nations need a sense of shared identity, shared values, and a shared purpose," unquote. And I'm like, "Oh," and here's what I said back to her, "Okay, well, Azeris have the shared value of hating Armenians. Palestinians have the shared purpose of hating Israelis. Pakistanis have the shared identity of hating Indians. It's interesting that hating an out-group unifies members of the in-group." You know what I'm getting at? I mean, all of this, uh,
Yeah,
there I mean, this is something that I sometimes wonder that's almost instinctual, a and y and you'll see a divide that there's this tendency now we got to form the in-group, and then therefore there's also the out-group, and one person I admire, talked about this happening in his kindergarten class, where there was one girl who came into the class who did not speak English and instead spoke German. He knew a little bit of German and he really befriended her quickly. But because she didn't speak English, she was already the target of bullying. And this was in a kindergarten class. And I'm just thinking, what is wrong here? What does this say about humanity, so to speak?
we're all sinners. That's what I'm going to be hearing probably. But I think you're right. I mean, it's the but let me just say, like the shared culture and shared purpose in America used to be liberty. It used to be,
Exactly.
hey,
Yeah, it was.
we follow the Constitution. Now we follow Donald Trump, and he can raise taxes by himself
Yeah.
without Congress. He can spend money without Congress. He can start wars. I mean, let's face it, spending money and starting
Yeah.
wars was
Yeah.
Biden and the
Yeah.
previous
I don't.
presidents too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it used to
I
be
don't.
liberty.
Yeah, I think for most Americans, that was the shared culture and the shared purpose. It was. Yes, to build something and to build a great country. And there was, and granted, this is one thing. Cultural chauvinism used to be justified in America. It's not justifiable anymore. And in some ways, I am a cultural chauvinist, is because I don't believe all cultures are equal. I mean, but there are some elements of cultures that I do like. I mean, I'd be thinner, but I like, for example, that Italians brought us pizza and spaghetti. I like that, I like, that Mexicans brought us tacos. It's, but, I think I think a culture, that, a culture of liberty is, and I don't know, one thing is true is you don't foster a culture of liberty by encouraging hate or encouraging this division of in groups and out groups. And, it's interesting
Absolutely.
now too. And, now that Trump is in the office, the right has gotten a lot more disgusting. These pundits, they've definitely taken their, I mean, I think they're actually, I mean, the left is now, the left has been trying to provoke a race war for a while now. And now they're almost to the point of saying, yeah, let's have a race war, and I think there are a lot of serious questions that we need to ask about what is, determined by genes and what is determined by other things. And I don't think we have to do a lot of research before we can ever really know that. But yes, there's a lot of, yeah. I don't really know where we go from here. But it does kind of worry me. Tom, the other thing too is there is such an industry now around immigration. I mean, you have, sometimes scam artists who will prey on immigrants and take, thousands of dollars to try to help them get citizenship, and then nothing happens. And also, even worse, I think America is the only country that has this immigrant incarceration industry. I used to work with a guy who overstayed his visa in Argentina. He was arrested. He was on a plane the next day. But in America, you get arrested and then you go to a prison for 6 months.
Right. Well,
I mean, there is a difference between somebody knocking on the door and saying, "I'm sorry, you can't come in." The person who's, if you say no to somebody at the door, they can still go to 200 other countries on this planet. But I don't, take that person and then shut them up in my basement for 6 months. And yet that's what America is about now. It's about the incarceration of immigrants. And when you incarcerate people long term, they are entitled to due process.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you're not entitled. Granted.
And the due process isn't even that difficult because like they can run through them pretty quickly because
Yeah,
the process is,
or
are you to be determined as, are you here legally or not? And then if you are not, then you
yeah,
can
or
be deported.
but I don't want
keeping
us
them.
I don't want us incarcerating immigrants just because they're immigrants.
No, I
would
don't
much,
either.
I would much rather than just say, "I'm sorry, you can't come in. Please go somewhere else. You can go anywhere, but you can't come in here. You can come. You can't come into our club, but there are 100 other clubs. You can go into those clubs."
Right.
You've denied them one choice, but you haven't denied them of their freedom. There is a difference.
Sure.
Yeah, and I don't know where, it's, not to mention I've had, I've heard, you should listen to my show with Alec Agizi. I've had various, stories of horror stories, like they put immigrants into these coolers, as they call them, like they literally put them like in some kind of room where they're staying there for 2 or 3 days at 50 degrees, stuff like that. It's just, you take the worst police brutality and then you apply it to, and then you multiply it by 10 when you deal with ICE. It's not, I don't, and Americans are cheering this on. It's,
Yeah. Some
you know, I mean, Tom, when the murder in Charlotte happened, I cynically posted on Twitter. I said, "Wait, an American killed an immigrant. Aren't you happy about this?" The girl on the train in Charlotte. which was absolutely horrible. And that guy should have been jailed. But I'm like, hey, wait, she's an immigrant, and an American killed an immigrant. You should be happy about this. And needless to say, they're not feeling that way, but which I'm glad.
No, because she was a pretty blonde white
Yeah, she
girl.
was a pretty. Yeah, she
That
was a
that
pretty.
was
Cool
that
dude.
was that was the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
yeah, that's another thing that made that, just like other stories, that hit the when it's the 20-something attractive blonde, it'll certainly get the press. But of course, what we really should focus on is the fact that that person had 12 or 14 convictions, but he was still walking the streets. But anyway,
absolutely.
you know, uh, I hope we can get some reform here, Thomas. I really, the troubling thing about this is I think there's a lot of lying on both sides here. And I don't know how we're ever going to get a good conversation when you have so much of that, because we've now got to clear through all this lying.
No, and I think they both like the controversy as it is because it
Yeah,
distracts. I mean, it's just like the shutdown, right? They they
yeah,
they both blame the other side. They love the government shutdown of like a quarter of the government. They they wanted that. Both
yeah,
Republicans and Democrats wanted same thing with the immigration. They want it to be the way it is so they can use it as an electoral issue and
yeah.
going forward.
Do you
Yeah.
think there are groups that are, like organizing mass, like somebody's rounding up 1,000 immigrants at somewhere and they're saying, hey, let's all go to America? Do you think, I mean, one thing I've said, about all the California,
Yes. Yes.
what can you say about that? Because I mean, most of the people who move from California to Austin, I mean, they're all just kind of spontaneously saying, hey, I want to move to Austin. There's not somebody, who's, gathering up 1,000 people in California and then dropping them in Austin. But well, what can you tell us about this?
Well, I haven't researched it that much, but
Yeah,
there are definitely NGOs. By NGOs, I mean near
not
government,
government
not
organizations.
yeah, yeah.
But
These are government funded, but groups like the Soros Group that are promoting the illegal immigration of immigrants to the United States with the idea of changing the electoral
uh,
balance. And I can go into that in a little bit more detail, but I'm running up against a hard out here pretty
okay,
soon.
yeah,
But but uh but there are some groups that are doing that. I don't know how much impact they had. And I know
it's
electorally they had almost no impact because Hispanic males voted for Trump.
yeah,
So it's that really didn't
yeah.
it
Well,
didn't help the Democrats.
yeah, well, that's something too, though. I wonder also if there's a way, you could, since you're actually facilitating the commission of a crime, that you could prosecute some people in these organizations. I don't really know what the law is, but if they are aiding, if they are an accessory to a crime, and in this case, accessory to, possibly hundreds of crimes, it seems like, not to mention, and Tom, we didn't go into this either. Ronald Reagan was very popular with immigrants. It wasn't until people like Pat Buchanan started coming out saying, "Oh, I hate immigrants," that immigrants suddenly decided, "Well, this political party hates us. We're going to go vote for the other one."
Well, that's
I
true.
mean,
I mean,
this is
Muslim
literally,
Americans were a solid Republican voting bloc until
yeah, this is
2000.
literally a case where the red team
Yeah.
comes out and says, "We hate you," and they say, "Well, I'm going to vote for you." And then they're complaining, "Well, why don't you vote for us? Because you told us
Yeah.
that you hate us."
Yeah.
I mean,
No, no, that's it. And then the Republican narrative is, see, they're all a bunch of leftists, right? I mean, that's that's it.
yeah.
Hey, I hate to do this to you,
Okay,
Chris. We
where
do
can we
this again
where can we
sometime.
find you out there? Where can we find you out there on the net?
Yeah, I'm on the Libertarian Institute,
Okay,
published regularly, and then also my own podcast, Blue Collar Breakdown, is on YouTube and Rumble. Definitely check that out. I do it every Wednesday night, 8:30 p.m.
okay,
to roughly
okay.
9.
Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack, and also go to buy me a coffee, or people give me money. Tom, I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but thank you. I'm Chris Baker, and we're out.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.